Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode, our first of 2022 of Orange Weekly. It's presented by Krause Health, and today we're live on the Syracuse Orange basketball Facebook page. We're live on the Syracuse Orange football Facebook page because we got a few football issues to discuss here, even in early January. It's always interesting, certainly. To get into some football issues and a lot of news this week, and including some unfortunate news that we heard on the Syracuse football front, but a busy offseason in the current frame of Syracuse football as well. We're live on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube as well. We pop on here every Thursday and just kind of talk about the latest in Syracuse sports. We'll focus on Syracuse men's basketball and football today. I'm flying solo today. Usually we'll have a guest on, one of my great colleagues from syracuse.com. Nate Mink, Mike Waters, Mike Curtis, Donna DeTota, Chris Carlson. What a stable of great writers we've got here. We usually bring them on to get the latest and greatest from their beats, but had a lot to say today and a lot of issues to get into. And I wanted you to be my guest today, right? So hop in the comments section, throw out some comments, some questions, and I'll certainly answer them as we go along here in the conversation. So wanted to focus on a couple of things today. We mentioned Syracuse basketball. And last night. Wasn't that the name of a movie? About last night. That's a brutal way to go down for Syracuse basketball. You know, a lot of you that pop in on this show also watch our post-game show, which we do live after every game. And that was as crazy and as busy and as passionate a post-game show as we've had in a while. A brutal way to lose for the Orange. So we'll dig into that a little bit, what it means as Syracuse is kind of sitting at kind of a literal crossroads, a literal fork in the road, if you will. It's 7-7 at this point. We mentioned football with the passing of Greg Robinson, and certainly we send our thoughts and prayers to his family, to the Syracuse University family. Still a lot of people up at SU that worked with Greg when he was the head coach here, and all that knew and loved him. We certainly send our condolences to them. It made me think about a different angle about how we look at our football coaches, right? Because, you know, say all you want about what happened on the field. There's no doubt that the results on the field were not ideal. It was one of the worst eras in Syracuse football history, if you want to look at it that way, on the field. But Greg Robinson and his family, terrific people, and what they meant to the community. And I thought I would tell some stories about dealing with football coaches in that way, off the field, stories, interactions, and you know, the gentlemen that have led Syracuse football in my time covering the sport, and kind of some different stories there. Somebody brought that up about Greg Robinson. I said, oh, that'd be, you know, interesting to talk about on Orange Weekly. So we'll do that, and we'll look at Syracuse's coaching additions. I think Dino Babers hit an absolute home run in his additions of Robert Anai at offensive coordinator, Jason Beck as quarterback coach, and I think it's been a great offseason on that front, and now we'll see what Syracuse does in the transfer portal. So we're going to hit all of those topics today. And I see a couple of you already saying this. Mike knows the drill. He watches our post-game show. Always love it when you guys tell me where you're watching from, including a David here tried to watch from the Dominican Republic last night, but glad that they missed it. Yeah, a lot of lake effect snow warnings up this way, David. So I hope you're enjoying your time there in the Dominican Republic. So you guys hang out in the comment section. I'll highlight some of them and answer them as we go here. But let's start with last night. Let's start with basketball. Now, we covered a lot on the post-game show, but just to kind of drop back on it, it was a stunning collapse for the Syracuse basketball team. It's not one of those games you look at and you say, oh, look, it's a one-point game. They were in it. They hung in there. They gave it the old college try. I don't think you can apply any of those things to this game. You've got an 18-point lead. You have a 14-point lead at halftime. Let's go over a few things here as I wrote in my column today. Okay. Give me a moment here to find it, because when you list these things out, when you actually write them out, it's incredible that these things came through and they still lost. Here it is right here. So last night you had 3 20-point scorers in a basketball game. Cole Swider, Joe Girard, Jesse Edwards. You had a school record 17 3-pointers. You had the most points in a game by an Orange center since 2008, Arenze Anawaku in 2008. You had an 18-point lead at one juncture of the game. You had a 14-point lead at halftime. And in 5 minutes in the second half, it started at the end of the first half, but really came through in the second half when Miami outscored Syracuse 58-43. Gone. Comes a whole new ball game in 5 minutes. Miami goes on to win. Yeah, it was a 1-point game. You know, Cole Swider had a garbage 3 at the end that didn't count. Counted for entertainment purposes only if you had a little something on the game last night. But again, not a game you look at and say, well, boy, they gave it the old college try there. No, they lost it and it slipped through their fingers. And it really makes you think about what kind of team this is and what they could do to get better. And, you know, look, this Syracuse team time and again has kind of straddled that line and popped into the NCAA tournament, and more often than not in recent years. But I think what we've got to kind of put in our heads here is the distinct possibility that this team is not only going to miss the NCAA tournament. I'm going to give you some numbers on that in a second here, but this could be Jim Boeheim's first losing season. Now, I'm not going to predict that now because I think this team's going to fight like hell to prevent that. And Jim Boeheim's never had a losing season in 46 years as head coach, but this is the worst start under Boeheim in his 46-year tenure. They've never been 500 this late in the season, and that trend's going to continue unless they start popping off some games here. Their one saving grace, the one thing they can hold on to, at least on paper, is there's a lot of quad one opportunities left here for this team. But in order to win those games and be in those games, they've got to get markedly better on defense. And obviously that's not the case right now. And, you know, look, what do you say we just get it out there right now, right? Should they play man-to-man defense, right? Have you pulled every lever you can? Have you tried everything possible? I think the answer to that is no, because I think in order to play effective man-to-man defense, you got to have athletes. And this is, I got to say, I want to frame this properly. I don't want to be mean here, but if we're just judging this team's athleticism versus recent teams, this is one of the most non-athletic teams I've seen in recent years. It's just the way it worked out. It's just a slower team. You've got to have athletes. You got to have guys that can go out there and chase on man-to-man defense. So I thought I'd cut you off at the pass, as they used to say in those old Westerns before somebody brought up the man-to-man issue, right? They don't have the athletes to do that, but man, desperate times call for desperate measures. And Jim Boeheim said the other day, even before, hit the microphone there, even before the loss last night, that they've tried everything they can to adjust the defense. And it's January 6th. And I don't know if they've tried everything, but I don't know if man-to-man's the answer there, right? So let's look at a couple of trends here, and shout out to our guy, Mike Waters, here, because he always gets some great questions in Mike's mailbox. I'm sure some of you watching have sent in some questions to Mike's mailbox, but here's the situation here, right? So this is a team that has 16 regular season games remaining, 17 if they make up that postponed game against Georgia Tech, right? So when it comes to Syracuse this late in the year, what their record is, it's their worst record through 14 games under Jim Boeheim. Prior to that, okay, the worst record through 14 games was 8-6. Syracuse was 8-6 in the 96-97 and 2019-20 seasons. They did not make the tournament in 96-97. They that was after a Final Four year, don't forget, 95-96. Cuse is in the house. Oh my God, oh my God. They didn't make the tournament the next year. Now, 2019-20, no one made the tournament because the tournament was canceled due to COVID, right? Syracuse wasn't making the tournament that year anyway. So 8-6. Prior worst record, they don't make the tournament. Syracuse's worst record through 14 games in a season in which they still made the tournament is 10-4, which happened just last year, if you don't recall, and Syracuse went to the Sweet 16. That's the thing. You put Syracuse in the tournament, they're going to reward you. They're going to make a deep run in the tournament more often than not. They're going to make a Sweet 16 run. They're going to make a surprise Final Four run. They're going to validate their invitation to the tournament. But the way this team's defense has faltered and the short amount of time they have to get better at it, you got to wonder what this team can hang its hat on, because look at the offensive numbers from last night. And man, the thing that jumps out to me the most is what a game for Jesse Edwards. Brought it up there, the most offensive points for a Syracuse center since Arenziano Waku in 2008. Jesse was aggressive. He called for the ball. His teammates were looking for him. He attacked the basket. He was 10 of 13 shooting, a lot of dunks, a lot of high percentage shots. flowing, playing confident. Jesse has just gotten markedly better there. He knows where to go, what to do, using his length, using his size. I think he was much better defensively last night. He was chasing the corner, which frankly he shouldn't be anyway. There's just a lot of ground to cover for Jesse Edwards to be constantly running out to the corner there, trying to chase down those guys, even with his length and the ability to close out some shots. Closed out a great shot in the corner last night, sent it about 6 rows into the stands. But that to me is an encouraging thing for this team, as bad as they are defensively at this point, is you've got a player in Jesse Edwards developing like that. So now what you have is an inside-outside game, right? Buddy Boeheim didn't have a great game last night, but typically is going to shoot well from the outside, even with opposing defenses just absolutely hounding him, right? But between Buddy, Cole, Joe, and Jimmy, if you can work the ball inside and make defenses crack down a little bit, right, and then kick the ball out, which is what we saw a little bit last night, at least this team's going to function on offense. But, man, to score 87 points and hit a lot of those marks that I mentioned earlier and to still lose just shows you how historically bad this team is defensively. And that's not just my opinion. That's statistically. That's trends-wise. That's numbers-wise. You look at Ken Pomeroy's stats. You look at ACC stats. You look with your own 2 eyeballs, and you can just see that this is a team that is pretty bad defensively. So I'm not sure how they dig out of that hole. You've got to play defense to go on a streak, to win games, to win some of those quad one opportunities that are up ahead. I mean, you can outscore a couple of teams, but you can't outscore all of them. So I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I mean, I don't get paid to coach. I just get paid to sit here and talk about the coaches and the players and analyze what's going on. I don't know what you do on defense because you need the athletes to cover ground in the 2-3 zone, and they can get better on defense, but we're talking about just getting to a functional level of defense at this point. So I'm not sure how they do that. As sure as Jay says here, Miami scored easy baskets after SU turnovers. That's the other big thing from last night, and that's what I'm wondering about in terms of a trend, right? Because this is not a team that turns the ball over a ton. They don't react well to pressure defense, but 19 turnovers, which led to 25 Miami points. Way too many easy points. So if I'm a Syracuse opponent and I am watching film of the most recent games, what am I going to do? I'm going to pressure defense this team. Maybe not even wait to the second half to do it like Jim Larinaga in Miami did. You're just going to get after this team. You're going to get after Joe Girard. You're going to get after this team. They don't have a lot of ball handlers. I think when Symir Torrance comes in, he makes a big difference there. Symir's a little limited offensively. And, that brings up something here too. And I just want to highlight a couple more of your comments here as we go, and appreciate you guys and gals watching today. Dennis does not agree with me about the man-to-man thing. They do practice man-to-man, Dennis. You're right about that. I mean, maybe we can see it. Maybe they can try it. Maybe they'll have to try it. But I think you got to have athletes to run a man-to-man defense. But, at this point, desperate times call for desperate measures. And listen, I don't want to be somebody to, how can I put this, to woulda, coulda, shoulda something, because he's not on the roster. He's not here. You got to move on. But think about this team with Kadari Richmond. Okay, let's just say, for argument's sake, everything works out. He doesn't want to transfer. He talks it out with Jim Boeheim and the coaching staff. They find a role for him, right? I mean, this is a guy that can get to the basket. It's a guy that's terrific at the top of the zone. It's a guy, think of the combination between him and Jesse Edwards at this point, somebody who is on this team, right? I just wish that worked out. This is not a guy that moved on because of the NBA. This is not a guy that moved on. There are some, circumstances we've seen. He moved on because of the transfer portal. He moved on because he wanted a better opportunity, which is, Seton Hall is a top 25 team. He's in a more crowded field. There's a lot of guards on that team. He still starts and gets some minutes and has made an impact, but I really think he would have made a bigger impact on this team if they could have worked something out there. I like Symir Torrance. As we mentioned, he had 6 assists last night. The guy plays 14 minutes. He gets 6 assists, right? He just makes a difference. And he's going to have to make a difference for this team, particularly with how many teams, as we noted, are going to play that pressure defense on Syracuse at this point. So I like Symir a lot. Smart kid, good kid, plays hard, not an offensive threat, though. And given what Kadari Richmond would do a year older, a year wiser, a year bigger, somebody that can really get in the lane and penetrate and give Syracuse an offensive threat there. Would it solve all their problems? Absolutely not. But I think it would give Syracuse a little bit more of an advantage there. So I was just thinking about that a little bit. Haven't tracked Quincy Guerrier lately in Oregon. Last I looked, certainly wasn't getting the numbers and the minutes that he would want. He wanted more freedom to shoot the three. He's not shooting the three really well. Again, last time I checked, which was before, even before Christmas break, I think. So you guys can update on that on me. You can update that for me, I should say, while we're talking about it here. But look, woulda, coulda, shoulda, can't do it. They moved on, but it's kind of hard not to think about given what this team really needs at this point. Somebody at the top of the zone and somebody that can penetrate. And get some offensive pressure there. Greg doesn't like it. Says, the minute you mentioned Kadari Richmond, I shut you off. Why talk about it? Get over it. Yeah, I don't blame you, Greg, but just something that crossed my mind last night. Mike says that Symir's doesn't have to be an offensive threat, but should be starting. I'll tell you what, I think that last night was a really good litmus test of when Joe and Symir are on the court together, which can happen, which is needed at times, that you let Symir run the offense, let Joe slip to the two and focus on his offense more. Now that Joe doesn't focus on offense in the position he's in now, he had 26 points last night and 7 of 12 career high 3-pointers for Joe Girard, which I was surprised to hear, by the way. All these games where he's gone off, to hear that 7 was his career high, I was actually kind of surprised by that. But as a couple of you were saying here in the comments, he's a true point guard. And I think there are times, and I think we have to see a little bit more of this when the situation calls for it, to just give Joe a break, get him off the ball, let him come off screens, get some open looks, and take the pressure off him a little bit, quite literally, especially with the way teams are going to continue to pressure defense this team and come at them a little bit. So that's basketball at this point. That's this team. They got Wake Forest coming up next, and Wake Forest is one of those teams, as we noted, one of those quad one opportunities left for the Orange. And look, their plan against Wake Forest has to be pretty much the same plan it was last night, as much as it ultimately didn't work. You need your shooters rolling. You got to get your offense cranking. You got to find some way to make a couple of stops on defense. We're talking about a couple stops here. We're talking about a functioning average defense at this point. But until Syracuse finds some kind of fix for the defense, it's just going to put a lot of pressure on the offense to continue to come through. 87 points last night, right? And I want to give you a couple of numbers here. Second half, right? And I want to mention this before I give you those numbers because Brian brings it up here. Benny Williams. Where's Benny Williams? Does he deserve more time? I think we're getting to that point where I think we're going to see more of Benny on the floor. But he says Benny was minus 28 against Colgate, but plus last night. Not sure if it's an anomaly. If more minutes would have been a minus, I think it would have been better with time. Look, I don't know about you guys, but I see a more confident player. I see an athlete on a team that lacks athletes. There's a guy that can get out there and help you. He's still raw in some ways. You got to be careful how you judge this. But, I mean, he hit a 3-pointer last night. You can see his confidence gaining in a lot of ways. I think he's got a presence in the zone, tends to block a shot or two when he's out there. And I think you got to let him go. I think you got to let him free. Now, the contrast is, who does Benny play for? Cole Swider's not shooting. There's your first choice. There's your first option right there. Maybe mix that up a little bit. Has Cole really earned? Last night, he came through. He had 20 points. 6 of 9 from 3-point range. That's what you're asking him to do. So not much more you can say about that. But if he's not shooting well, that's Benny's opportunity maybe to get in there and show what he can do some more. And you got to change some things up. And maybe we see a little bit more of Benny, a little bit more of Symir in certain game situations as we go down the stretch here. So the thing, I want to give you a stat. And how about this with this team? I'm not sure if it'll make a difference, but you got to try a little bit of everything at this point. So with school out of session right now, they did not come back home. They went right from Miami to Wake Forest. They're going to stay there, practice, and get ready for Saturday's game. That's a 2:00 tip time. That's a pretty atypical thing. Syracuse typically does not do that, even when school's out of session. It was kind of a decision about, and it makes sense to me. Why come home for a day, fly back down to Wake Forest, give yourself an extra travel day? It's not that it's a big trip from Miami to Wake Forest, right? But I kind of like the business trip approach, get away from things a little bit. Not that campus is too busy right now, as we mentioned, because school's out of session at this point. But in case you didn't know, they did stay, and they're going to kind of make it a business trip, if you will. and focus on that. And we'll see if it makes a difference in this matchup. But I thought that was a pretty interesting note about what they're doing here. Second half differential is something I wanted to note here with this team. So in their 7 losses this year, Colgate, VCU, Auburn, Villanova, Georgetown, Virginia, Miami. Okay. Here was the second half point differential in those losses. Shout out to my guy, Jim CBW, who is a commenter and somebody who listens to my radio program and comes in our live chat on the radio. I've seen him in here a couple of times as well. He compiled these stats. I saw him on Twitter today. I wanted to give him a shout out for going and doing the research on this. So this was the point differential second half in those 7 losses. Colgate was plus 12, VCU plus 16. Huge second half for VCU in that game. Auburn plus 11, Villanova plus 17, Georgetown plus 14, Virginia plus 5. That was a pretty tight game. Miami plus 15. Syracuse up 44-30 at halftime, 58-43 second half score in that game. Until that gets better, this is going to be a team that is we're going to see those kind of games we saw last night. Virginia on down the line, some of those losses. That Georgetown and Colgate loss in particular, really going to hurt Syracuse's resume. Those are both triple-digit net rankings right now. VCU is actually, I think, like 67, so it doesn't like kill you. It's a game you certainly want in your resume. And even if Syracuse had beaten Miami last night, not a quad 1 win. They're a team that's near the top of the ACC rankings, and their net rankings only going to get better at this point. They're 4-0 in the ACC so far this year, and a really down ACC year. This is one of the worst ACC seasons I've ever seen. And it's early. We'll see if a couple teams emerge here, but it's not like there's going to be a flood of teams that get into their rankings here. This is parity at its best or worst, depending on how you want to look at it in college basketball. But you got to get some quad 1 wins. And Wake Forest is Syracuse's next golden opportunity to do that. Okay, so that's basketball. Wanted to switch gears and talk a little football here on 2 fronts. We mentioned it earlier. Man, to get that news yesterday takes your breath away to hear something like that. In that a former Syracuse football head coach, Greg Robinson, passed away. He was 70 years old. Unfortunately, as his son Dominic told our Chris Carlson on syracuse.com, Greg died as a result of Alzheimer's disease, which is such a horrible disease. Anybody that's ever been through it has seen family and friends go through it. It's one of the worst things to see somebody go through. Unfortunately, there's no cure for it now. They've made a lot of gains in the area of Alzheimer's and research and medication and treatment, but unfortunately, still a disease that a lot of people are dealing with their parents, their grandparents, and as you get older, you start to wonder about those situations there and people that have gone through them. So my heart goes out to his family and everybody at Syracuse that knew and loved him. And, look, football wise, the record speaks for itself. It was one of the worst 4-year stretches Syracuse football has ever seen. Greg just didn't work out as a head coach here. It was a weird time. Paul Pasqualoni gets fired after the Champs Sports Bowl in 2004. And Darryl Gross had just taken over as athletic director, right? That whole thing was handled very poorly. I remember a press conference, Nancy Cantor, who was the chancellor at the time, Paul Pasqualoni, and Nancy says, this is early December, that they were bringing back Paul Pasqualoni as head coach. And look, for the record, as those of you that remember know, I wanted to see a change made. So, even somebody that wanted to see a change made, sitting in that press conference, hearing the chancellor say, we're going to bring back Paul, but the new athletic director will get to make their own decision on this. I think I literally asked a question in that press conference, if I recall correctly, that was along the lines of, what exactly are you doing here? Like, why are you going to leave this guy hanging for 3 weeks? Just, make a decision here about what you're doing. But it was a time of transition. Syracuse goes to the Champs Sports Bowl. They get smoked, 51-14 by Georgia Tech. Paul Pasqualoni, as the legend goes now, was literally fired at halftime of that game. Darryl Gross was basically ordered to fire Paul Pasqualoni. So Darryl Gross, new at Syracuse, from the West Coast, USC roots, taps the intelligence and taps the advice of his good friend Pete Carroll, who at the time was one of the big names in college football. Pete's good friends with Greg Robinson. 2-time Super Bowl champion Denver Broncos, had just had a successful Rose Bowl run with University of Texas at that time. And look, I know what we're talking about now in terms of Greg Robinson and what his reputation is football-wise and what people remember about him here. At the time, he had a very strong defensive coach reputation. Football-wise, though, it didn't work out. It was a very pro-football approach. A lot of coaches that didn't know how to recruit, didn't know how to connect with a high school coaching fraternity, didn't know the area, didn't know. It was just a disaster in terms of how things went. There were a couple of highlights in the Robinson era, to be fair. The Louisville game in 2007, Syracuse at the time was the biggest underdog college football had ever seen. Wins that game, 38-35. Andrew Robinson, no relation. Remember him at quarterback for Syracuse? He has like 425 yards, something crazy in that game. And of course, Notre Dame in 2008, when Robinson had already been told that he had been fired. Syracuse goes out and beats Notre Dame at South Bend. So there were a couple of highlights there. The little engine that could speech. I don't know if you guys remember that when he came to a press conference and didn't read the little engine that could. He read a Wikipedia page of the little engine that could. And that was, kind of an interesting way for Greg to go out. But I'll say this, and it brought me to something that I felt would be kind of a different topic when we talk about these coaches. Because unequivocally, Greg Robinson was a terrific man. He was a terrific person. His family, very dedicated to the community. His son still works here in Central New York, as a matter of fact. And he loved Central New York. He loved the people of Central New York. He loved the community, right? Gave back to St. Lucy's Church in downtown Syracuse and so many different community events. I can't even list them all. So it made me think about, somebody asked me this on Twitter. It made me think about the kind of the people you deal with, not just the coaches, the calls, the X's and O's, the wins and losses that you analyze, but the people that you deal with, right? So let's go through it quickly here. These are the coaches that I've had the opportunity to, I've lived here in Central New York my whole life. So I go back to, Frank Maloney on to Dick McPherson. I mean, Dick McPherson could have run for mayor of Syracuse at one time and won, of course. And we miss Coach Mack, of course. Paul Pasqualoni, never got to know the man. I covered him, covered a lot of his games, a lot of his press conferences, and, covered Syracuse football under Paul for a long time. Never got to know the man beyond football. He was all business and still is all business to this day, still coaching at the University of Florida at this point. So I don't have a lot of personal relations there. I mean, I've heard some stories about Paul and, like people would see him at like Bruger Bagels at 6:30 in the morning on the way into the office or something like that. But just not a guy you'd see around town, just not a guy that did anything but sit in his office and watch film. So I unfortunately don't have a lot of stories about Paul there. Moving on to Greg Robinson. Don't have a ton of personal stories about Greg other than what I mentioned and what I heard and how dedicated he was to the community. As James says here in his comments, met Greg at the Sherwood Inn one time, personable, nice gentleman. I remember Greg really helped me out. I was doing a piece about Syracuse in the Super Bowl when he was coaching, and obviously had coached in 2 Super Bowls. It was very gracious with his time and it told me a couple of stories about, the Super Bowl and being in the Super Bowl and what that meant. And I appreciated that. Certainly when things started to get deeper in his tenure, we were pretty critical of how he was as a football coach. And, that's my job as a columnist and as a radio host. You got to look at it objectively and fairly and look at how things were going on the field. Off the field, never heard a bad thing. Never had a complaint about him. And I didn't get to really know him that much personally off the field, but everything I've heard was great. Doug Marrone takes over for Greg Robinson. And Doug was kind of all business too. I had a few private meetings with Doug, couple by my request, couple by his request, just to kind of go over some things. And what I always appreciated about Doug was, look, he loves Syracuse University. And when, the dream job comments kind of took on a life of their own after that, but he truly loves Syracuse. He took a lot of pride in coming in and basically fixing Syracuse football, getting it back on the right track. He's a pretty intense guy at times. We had some intense conversations behind the scenes, but I always appreciated that he made the time. And a funny Doug Marrone story I have, I've told this on the air before, is when he took over as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills, right? So I'm at Buffalo Bills training camp, and he's out there, and he just spots me on the sideline, and he waves me over, like onto the field. So all my buddies that cover the Buffalo Bills, they're looking at me like, man, who the heck's this guy? What's going on here? And what I found funny was Doug called me out onto the field. And it wasn't like, hey, how you doing? Hey, Brent's here from Syracuse, a familiar face. Like, he wanted to let me know that he, in no certain terms, disagreed with a story that I wrote about how, of all people, remember this name, Doug recruited and treated AJ Long when he visited Syracuse versus how Scott Schaefer did when he visited Syracuse. And I just remember smiling and looking at Doug, and literally, here we are watching an NFL training camp practice. He's an NFL head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And I said, it's the internet. I can swear, right? I'm not going to say the word, but I'll tell you in an edited version of what I said. I said, Doug, why do you give a bleep? Why do you give a dog excrement about that story? You're an NFL head coach. Look where we are right now. And he kind of got a chuckle about that. He's like, well, I just wanted to let you know. And he kind of gave me some details about that. As I found that funny. I mean, here's the guy in the National Football League, and he's still thinking about stories I wrote about him 8 months before that. So that moves us to Scott Schaefer. And I got to tell you, Scott Schaefer's always going to have a special place in my heart, even though, he was fired as head coach and things worked out the way that did on the field. And the reason for that is when Scott was here as the head coach at Syracuse, unfortunately, my father passed away at that time. And Scott had his father pass away, I think around the same age that I did when he was younger, right? He lost his father pretty young. And I remember Scott went to one of his press conferences right at the beginning of the 2014 season, right? And it said some nice words about my father, said some nice words about me, and I'll never forget that. But what I truly won't forget in that realm is how many times, after a press conference, I'd see Scott somewhere professionally, and he'd pull me aside and he would say, how you doing? How's your family doing? Ask questions, follow up, right? Just really was concerned and wanted to share with me what he had went through at that time. And I always, I'll never forget him for that. I'll always appreciate that. Who would take the time to do that? He's a busy guy. He's got a lot going on, but he never forgot that. It wasn't just kind of a one and done thing. He followed up a lot, and I always appreciated that. And that meant a lot to me. Even, you got to keep some professional boundaries, of course, too. But I mean, that's just something that you won't forget. I mean, Dino Babers is, of all the coaches that Syracuse has had, you want to talk about a guy that's tapped into pop culture, that's tapped into movies, that's tapped into just everything beyond football. A lot of stories about that. There's a particular movie that Dino made a reference to at one time that we were talking about here. I forget how it came up. It came up randomly, and he'll still remind me of that. He'll still bring up the name of that movie in some press situations and kind of look at me when he does it. The name of the movie, by the way, is The Cutting Edge, which is a figure skating movie of all things. And I always found that interesting. But I think of all the coaches we've covered, the work-life balance there. Greg, I think, was in that department too. But just a guy you could talk about Game of Thrones with, and TV shows and pop culture. And I'm a Star Wars geek. We've talked Star Wars before, right? So I always appreciate that about Dino, that the guy's got a life beyond football. Works hard, does everything a football coach has to do, and the demands of the job. And he's got some demanding things going on now, as we're going to get to here shortly to wrap up. But that's what I appreciate about Dino is, he's the anti-Pasqualoni in that way. And nothing against Paul. That was his life. That's what he wanted to do. But, Paul, the only film Paul Pasqualoni ever watched was football. At least Dino's watching shows and movies and doing things beyond that. So I always appreciate that about him. And we'll see what year 7 brings. And on that note, we'll close on this. But before we went to break, this was a possibility. It's now official, as it has been recently confirmed, that Syracuse brought in Robert Anai from Virginia, Jason Beck from Virginia to add to the coaching staff. Folks, these are home run hires by Syracuse football. And you say to yourself, well, why were they available? Why would Syracuse have the opportunity to bring in a 3-time Art Broyles Award nominee? The Art Broyles Award goes to the best assistant coach in college football, and Robert Anai. Jason Beck is one of the most respected quarterback coaches in college football. The reason was Bronco Mendenhall stepped down at Virginia, which surprised a lot of people. And I still haven't really seen a official, thorough clarification of that. Personal reasons. You hope it's not health reasons. Hope everything's okay there. So when Dino began the process of looking for a new offensive coordinator and looking for new coaches, that was not on the table. But when it did get on the table, and there were plenty of suitors for both of them, he was able to convince them. Syracuse was able to invest in an offensive coordinator and a quarterback coach, align here with an offensive-minded coach, and Syracuse kind of switched to the ground and pound Sean Tucker-led approach last year. We'll see if they, get another quarterback out of the portal, if Justin Lamson is developing at a rate where he can contribute, if Jacobian Morgan can overtake Garrett Schrader. But Jason Beck has worked with quarterbacks like Schrader. Robert and I has worked with quarterbacks like Schrader. So if anybody's going to bring out the best of what Schrader can offer passing the football, and that's going to be a huge step in his development because he's limited throwing the football, you brought in the coaches that can do it, right? Here's what Syracuse is essentially looking for, guys. One win, right? Remember that, what was that in City Slickers, right? He's like, I'm looking for that one thing. Syracuse is looking for one win. That's it. That's all they got to do. I mean, different seasons, different strokes, different opponents, right? You can't just carbon copy one season to the next. But in the quest for one win, at the very least on the coaching front, I would put Bob Ligashevsky in there too, their new special teams coordinator, because the two biggest issues from Syracuse football last year were play calling. Let's make it three. Play calling, time management, special teams. Those were Syracuse's three biggest issues. And Dino went after it hard with the hirings of Robert and I, Jason Beck, and Bob Ligashevsky. Now, they got 16 players to replace that have gone into the transfer portal. They are bringing back, we'll see if it rounds out this way, 20 of 22 starters as of now. A lot of experience. Mikel Jones is coming back. Garrett Williams is coming back. Andre Schmidt is coming back, right? People feared Sean Tucker would leave. I always felt like he was coming back, but that's like officially official, if you will, that we'll get the pleased with my performance tweets again in 2022. So there's a lot of returning talent coming back too. They've got to replenish a lot in the transfer portal. Their work is far from done here, but if we're going to be critical and we're going to point out the flaws, you got to be fair and look at what Syracuse football did right. And what they did right was bringing in Robert and I and Jason Beck. Big moves there for Dino. Okay, what do you say we wrap it up there? Always appreciate you guys coming by. Great comments and questions today. We'll see if the Syracuse basketball team can kick it up a notch here. Their next opportunity to do that is against Wake Forest. Just a reminder, I'll be with you on Syracuse basketball postgame. If you're watching right now on the Syracuse Orange basketball Facebook page, we're here live after every Syracuse basketball game. And now that we've kicked it into ACC play, we'll be here after every game, taking your comments and questions, reacting live to Syracuse basketball. If you miss it, though, it does archive on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube. We'll fire it off on our social media channels, so make sure you're following SYR Basketball, SYR Football. You're watching on Facebook right now, so you're already following us on Facebook here. We put it on YouTube. Plenty of places to find both this show, Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health, and our basketball postgame shows if you do miss them live. But we hope you can come by and hang out Saturday. So it's a 2 o'clock tip time. That means we'll be doing postgame about 4 o'clock or so. Thanks as always, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next time, not only here on Orange Weekly, but Saturday after the Orange take on Wake Forest.